Ya Ali Madad. My name is Warda Aziz Ali-Baloch, and I will be the moderator for today's Critical Conversation. The Critical Conversation series has been conceived as an ITREB USA initiative aimed at engaging the entire Jamaat, but also with a focus on 18 to 40-year-olds. This series aims to explore the critical questions of our time, but within the context of our faith. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous people as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional territories. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. It is important to understand also the long existing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context, for colonialism is an ongoing current process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. We would like to open our session today by acknowledging that the land on which I reside is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Nisenan tribes in Rockland, California. These tribes have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we would like to take a moment to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. We believe that the work we do in these sessions, like these, are a part of our ongoing responsibility to acknowledge the ongoing harm that is done to Indigenous people on these lands, and working towards a society that is more just, equitable, and in keeping with our ethics as Ismaili Muslims. During the holy month of Ramadan and in preparation for Laylatul Qadr, as we are only a few days away, today's topic that we'd like to explore as a critical conversation is on the spiritual quest, exploring the spirituality of Imam Ali, alayhi salam. Today's session will provide an opportunity for us to explore the life of Imam Ali, the transcendental nature of Hazrat Ali's spirituality, and also the relationship between spirituality and ethics. So during this session, you will also see a Q&A box through which you can share additional questions or your thoughts throughout the presentation, and we will try to address as many questions submitted during today's talk as we can. So with that said, let me introduce you to our panelist who I'm very excited to have the opportunity to speak to during this conversation. Dr. Hussein Rashid has published academic works on the role of technology in teaching religion, Malcolm X, Qawwali, and intra-Muslim racism. He has written extensively about Imam Ali, including a piece on Imam Ali as Islam's first hero, Imam Ali in comics, several pieces on the relevance of Imam Ali's teachings in the modern period, and how images of Imam Ali also open interfaith conversations. He also recently finished co-editing a book on Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, Marvel Comics' first Muslim character to headline her own comic. Pretty cool. Dr. Rashid is currently co-editing a volume on Islam and popular culture and another volume on Islam in North America, and co-authoring a cultural history of Muslims in America. He is currently affiliated with the New School, is a fellow with the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute, and is on the advisory boards of Anikaya Dance Theater. Dr. Rashid talks regularly at churches, synagogues, and mosques on Shia Muslim perspectives on anti-racism. He has a bachelor's from Columbia University and a master's and PhD from Harvard University. At the outset, we would just like to note that the views of our speakers expressed during the course of this discussion are their own. And with that, let's turn to the conversation. Hussein, really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you about this topic and such an opportune time as well as we approach Laylatul Qadr. So with that, the first thing I'd like to discuss with you is we tend to think of Imam Ali as almost through a Shia lens, but he has had a broader impact on Muslim thought and history. So could you start us off by going over some of those broader roles?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ya Ali Madad. Ramadan Kareem, everyone. I want to acknowledge as well that I'm speaking to you from New York City on land traditionally stewarded by the Lenape people, and give thanks for the ability to be here with you today. And thank you, Warda, for that wonderful introduction and that great opening question to start thinking about Imam Ali, because I think when we think about Imam Ali alayhi salam, we tend to think about him with that prefix, Imam, and we tend to think of him really as the first of our line of Imams, of our divinely ordained leaders, the continuation of Allah's guidance to us, the blessings through which we receive Allah's guidance to us is through the Imams. But we have to make sure that we don't fall into a trap of divorcing Imam Ali and therefore ourselves from a broader Muslim context, right? When we look at Imam Ali historically, he is, of course, for us, the first Imam. For Sunnis, he is, and for us, historically, he's also the fourth Caliph, because the Caliphate is a different institution than Imamat. So he is also the fourth Caliph, and he's an incredibly close companion of the Prophet, obviously, which is why we believe he's the Imam. But it's reported Abu Bakr, the first caliph, reports the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to Abu Bakr that to see the face of Imam Ali is an act of worship. And this is Abu Bakr, right, the first caliph and the person who takes that position from Imam Ali, who holds this up. And so I think it's very important to recognize this role that Imam Ali plays. And then, of course, we can talk about Sufism, where Imam Ali is recognized amongst the majority of Sufi orders, of the Turuq, of the various Sufi tariqas, that he is the fount of knowledge, right? Going back to this hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, Ana Madinat al-Ilm wa Ali Babaha, I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the gate. Or, of course, the very well-known hadith, Man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawlahu. He whose mawla I am, Ali is his mawla. And so we have to recognize the deep impact and the deep role that Imam Ali has in Muslim communities beyond a Shi'i lens, and to also think about what does that mean for us, not only as Shia to look at Imam Ali, but what is the whole corpus of Imam Ali's work. And one thing I just want to mention very briefly right now is that this talk is coming at an important time. As you mentioned, we are leading up to Laylatul Qadr in 2 days, but these are also the days of the martyrdom of Imam Ali, from when he was attacked to when he dies. And it's actually these days right now, we're in right now, which we commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Ali, on which we're speaking upon his greatness.
Yeah, and thank you for that acknowledgement, Hussein. I think it's an opportunity for us to reflect on what Hazrat Ali stood for, his words, his reflections, and truly what it means when we're enacting spirituality in our daily lives. So with that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about multiple readings of Imam Ali that we find daily inspiration from. There's a well-known hadith from Angel Jibril who says to the Prophet Muhammad at the Battle of Uhud, a phrase that many of us are very familiar with, La fata ila Ali, la sayf ila zulfikar. How are some of the ways in which we can understand the saying?
I love this saying. Obviously, it's part of our ritual practice. It's very important to us as Shia. It is something that, to me, resonates so beautifully because on the obvious level, on the superficial level, on the exoteric level, on the Zahir, right? It is about Imam Ali, the warrior at the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Khaybar, right? At all these battles where he is the standard bearer of the Prophet, where he's tearing doors off forts. There's stories of Imam Ali battling the devil and the angel Jibril telling him, stop, because we need the devil, you can't get rid of him. And we know the beauty of the sword Zulfikar, not just as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of truth, right? If in the Anglophone world, they talk about Excalibur, we talk about Zulfikar, because it's not just a weapon of war, it is a symbolic of truth and justice in the way that Imam Ali is. But I think the other thing that we have to remember is that the phrase that's used for hero is fata. And fatwa, we think about fatwa. This is this chivalrousness. This is this ethical component. It's not just about this physical prowess, but it's about the totality in the ways in which Imam Ali lived his life. And so there's this really beautiful story that's told in Jalaluddin Rumi's Masnavi, where he says Imam Ali is battling his enemy in one-on-one sword combat. And Imam Ali disarms his enemy. And he's getting ready to slay his enemy. And his enemy spits on him. And Imam Ali sheaths his sword. And his enemy says to him, "Why you had me defeated? Why did you sheath your sword?" He said, "When you spat on me, I became angry. So then I was going to strike you for my sake. Before we were fighting, and I was doing this for the sake of God. Now I was doing it for myself." Right? And it's this idea that he has to control his anger and recognize that he cannot operate out of anger. Right? Which is not to say that we don't hold off on these emotions. Right? There's another saying, and I'm going to paraphrase here, attributed to Imam Ali, that if your anger controls you, you're nothing more than an animal. But if you're not angry at the injustices you see in the world, you don't deserve to be called human, right? So it's not about that, oh, we should be not having these emotions, but it's that we should be in control of them. These emotions are natural, we should be in control of them. And how do we respond to them? And so here's Imam Ali controlling his anger, and here it becomes more symbolic of his nafs, his lower self, right? This idea that we have this ability, because we have the ability to reason, because we recognize God, we have the ability to act. We can act in a way that betters ourselves, that elevates ourselves and elevates our communities. And so when we think about Imam Ali as the Fatah, it is not just this heroism on the battlefield, but is this idea of being able to move beyond one's more basic instincts, right? This is why, also very many Sufi orders, as I mentioned earlier, turn to Imam Ali as a source of guidance, as a source of emulation as well. And here with Imam Ali, we have to understand that these teachings, of course, are not just Shia specific. They are much more broad. They apply to the entire Muslim community, right? People who are reading the Masnavi are not just Shia. They're not looking at that just as Shi'i teachings. And so we have to understand that Imam Ali then becomes a way for us to understand that religion is not a private affair, but it's something that we live in public. And it's not just about prayers, and it's not just about physical acts, but it's about the ethics and the niyat that informs all of that.
So well said, especially the last point regarding living our religion publicly. I think that's such a beautiful statement, because for so many of us, sometimes there is that separation of prayer and reflection versus how we act in our daily lives. And the way you've outlined Hazrat Ali's story is such a beautiful reflection of how there really is no separation. It's about that reflection internally being the same outwardly. So thank you for that. Next, I also wanted to reflect a little bit with you on how Imam Ali is also held up as a model of intellectualism, and we haven't really touched on that yet. So can you tell us a little bit why?
Yeah, Warda, thank you for noticing what I'm not saying, because I think sometimes it's important to be called out on it, right? Obviously, we're coming from a Shia background where the role of the intellect, and I sort of started hinting at it before, but the role of the intellect is assumed for us. That to be Shia is to recognize that we have this intellect, that we have this aql, that we are granted this blessing by God, right? And that we have this ability, and it should be something that informs us. It's I think sometimes we fall into this false dichotomy, particularly in a Western philosophical mode, of a distinction between faith and intellect. And really, I think it's a false dichotomy, not only for us as Muslims, but for people in faith in general. I think if we look at, there's a man named Frank Collins, who's the director of the used to be the director of the Human Genome Project here in the United States, who's a devout Catholic and has written, extensively about his religious worldview informing his scientific quests. And I think that we ourselves cannot fall into that trap either. Historically, we have always, as Muslims, have always used our intellect to understand the blessings God has bestowed upon us through creation, to deepen our understanding of how God's blessings to us, but also to deepen our relationship with God in the world. It's not just, oh, if I have faith, I cannot use my mind, or if I'm using my mind, I cannot have faith. But you cannot have faith without using your mind, and you cannot use your mind properly without having faith, right? It becomes these empty modalities of either mimicking and copying people without thinking it through, or doing things without thinking through what are my obligations to other people, to creation, and to God. it is, I think, also something that breaks one of our principal tenets as Muslims, the principles of Tawheed, the unicity of God. To say that my mind is separate from my soul is to say God has created two different things in one person, right? And so it's not truly a violation of Tawheed, but it says, oh, God can only be understood this way and I can understand everything else this other way. And it says, no, it breaks up this idea that God should be approached through all these ways because God is everywhere and God is complete and totality in this. And coming back very specifically to Imam Ali, there's a beautiful story told about Imam Ali where these three children come to Imam Ali. They say, look, our father has passed away. He has these 17 camels and he's left us these 17 camels as his inheritance. And this is the way he's asked us to give away the camels. He says, the eldest son should get half the camels. The second eldest son should get 1/3 of the camels. And then the third child, the youngest child, should get 1/9 of the camels. So the children say to Imam Ali, if we start by dividing the camels in half, then the eldest son out of 17 camels gets 8.5 camels. We can't quite do this. So Imam Ali says, okay, I'll do this for you. I'm going to give you 1 camel, so you have 18 camels. And the eldest son then gets 9 camels. He's supposed to get half. The second son gets 1/3 of the camels, so that son gets 6 camels. And then the youngest son, who's supposed to get 1/9 of the camels, gets 2 camels. So that's 9, 6, and 2 for a total of 17 camels. Exactly what the father left behind. 1 camel is left over, which is Imam Ali's camel, and he takes it back, right? And this too is a way to understand that you don't run away from using your mind in order to do good in the world, but that to do good in the world is an act of faith and you have to use your mind to do it. That these are very interrelated concepts.
Beautiful. I love that story. And I think you've really touched upon how there is a relationship between religion, intellect, action, and they're all interrelated. But can you tell us a little bit about Iman, or how does faith fit into the picture with all of this?
Thank you, Warda. This is something I spend a lot of time with my students on because we tend to use religion and faith interchangeably, but that's not really the way most religions are structured, right? Even in our understanding, we talk about deen, religion, and iman, faith, which you've already mentioned. And we have to understand that religion is the public acting out of faith. Religion is a social construct. It's a social thing. So we belong to the religion of Islam. And those who practice Islam are Muslims. But we also make a distinction between Muslims, those who practice Islam, and Mormons, those who have faith, right? So that even that there's a distinction. This is not language that is unique to us as Ismailis. This is a much broader distinction. But to come back to your question, religion is the way we act because of community norms and expectations. Faith is how you act because of what you believe. So they're not unrelated, they're very much interconnected. But for example, if we were to think about this in very practical terms, right? We've just finished the month of April. This was about environmental care. Last week's critical conversation was about environmental care and our obligation, and thinking about ourselves as stewards. Right, so the Quran talks to us about stewardship, talks to us about seeing all of creation as signs for us who reason. Interesting enough, coming back to this question of reason, right? That you look at creation and there are signs in it for those who reason, those who use their aql, right? And so there is this notion that God is telling us creation is there as our responsibility, that we're supposed to steward over it. What our religion tells us is not very practical in terms of what that stewardship is. But as an act of faith, we know we need to have this stewardship. So we can operate in ways that are sympathetic to the religion, the stewardship, but that are particular to our understanding of the faith. So some people may invest more in water and access to clean water, right? I mean, the number of cities in the United States that do not have access to clean water, right? The richest country on earth, its citizens do not have access to clean water. That should be an affront to our sensibilities, that why are people here not having clean water? And then what happens to the rest of the world where we don't have clean water, right? And so this becomes a way to drive movement. Then if enough people say, okay, we're really invested in clean water, then you see the religion saying, okay, because it's made up of the community of believers, of the mu'mineen, that then you say the religion is starting to say, okay, this is how we as a community, as a religion, now have to start thinking and acting around delivering clean water access. And it comes back to this idea that because we have to use our minds to understand the world around us, our responsibilities to each other, and how to comprehend religion, then it's very evident that faith, intellect, religion, actions are all interconnected and constitute what it means to be Muslim. And for us, or for me at least, Imam Ali is always that role model because he's always living that out in a seamless, integrative way, right? You have to start peeling away what he's doing to say, okay, where's faith? Where's religion? Where's intellect? Where's ethics? Because for him, he's the totally integrated person. He's the insan kamil, the perfect person to whom we are trying to emulate.
Yeah, beautiful. And that also reminds me of Imam Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which I think brings out so many of these concepts that you have talked about. And as you've written a lot on it, you still see this as providing guidance within the modern period. I'd just like to share one of the passages that really touched my heart that was brought to light by some of our educators who are advocates of intentional inclusion efforts. And the passage says, "Take care of the affairs of them who do not approach you because of their unsightly appearance or those whom people regard as low. Appoint for them some trusted people who are God-fearing and humble. They should inform you of these people's conditions. Then deal with them with a sense of responsibility to Allah on the day you will meet him, because of all the subjects, these people are the most deserving of equitable treatment, while for others also you should fulfill their rights so as to render account to Allah." What are your thoughts on this passage, or just in general the writings that Imam Ali has documented in his letter to Malik al-Ashtar?
Where I could spend hours talking about this. I love this letter. But let me ask you a question. You said that you got this as a way to think about inclusion in
Yeah.
educational settings. How were you reading this to engage with questions of inclusion?
Yeah. So some of the important points that our educators had brought up that really touched my heart is this idea of those whom people regard as low. So the Imam is not saying that they are low or they are unsightly. He's saying that we regard them in that way. The other thing that really touched my heart is that it is not the responsibility of those who are marginalized to come up and to tell us, you're not standing up for us. It is our responsibility to go out and become their voice. And so I found that really powerful because that applies even in today's circumstances when we look at what's happening within the current events.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's important for those who are unfamiliar with the letter. This letter is written by Imam Ali when he is Caliph to a man named Malik al-Ashtar, who is appointed as the governor of Egypt. Malik al-Ashtar is a former general. He is appointed the governor of Egypt. And this letter that Imam Ali writes to Malik al-Ashtar is considered not just by Shias, not just by Muslims, but really by governance, people who do work on governance, as a model document in terms of ethical governance for many of the reasons that you were pointing out, right? I mean, Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, has pointed out this letter most recently. But I think it's also a mistake to look for external validation, right? That we have to understand that this is valuable because this is ethical guidance from an imam that resonates even till today, that resonates to the modern period. And I think for very many of the same reasons that you're pointing out, right? Ethical guidance is not time bound. Ethical guidance is always relevant. It's the manifestations of those ethics that are different. But for me to think about those who are unsightly in appearance or those whom we regard as low, and I think you're absolutely right, it's about power. Who are we not allowing to be part of our community? Who are we saying you are not worth our time and effort? And then whose responsibility is it to correct that? It is still our responsibility. I come back to that. For me, the letter to Malik al-Ashtar is also a way to think about trying to put the Quran's teachings into practice. So there's this verse of the Quran that God will not change the condition of the people until they are willing to change it for themselves. In other words, we will not be made better until we choose to make ourselves better, right? And then comes this, for every step we take towards God, God will take 10 steps towards us. As we walk towards God, God will come running to us. But we have to be willing to make that commitment. And I think for me, this is that moment, is that God is saying, we are one community. And we are saying, no, we're not one community. And here's Imam Ali saying, you, Malik al-Ashtar, it is your job to make sure that these are one community. Do not ignore anyone. That is not your role. That is not your decision to make, right? And the letter actually opens with this beautiful passage, be merciful to the people as you wish God to be merciful to you on the day of judgment, right? And so it's this idea that if you're in a position of authority, if you're in a position of trust, your obligation is to manifest those attributes of the divine that you wish to see in the world, that you wish to see manifest upon yourself, right? That then you manifest those upon other people. And that is the obligation of leadership. Without that obligation, what you've done is you've become the vulture who seeks to take from people. You've become the Pharaoh of Moses's story, right? And I think this, to me, is why this letter is so powerful. And it's not just Imam Ali, right? We see this with the entire Ahlul Bayt, with all these stories, with Bibi Fatima, who stands against Abu Bakr and refuses to give her bayat as caliph, and argues with Abu Bakr and Umar over the taking of the land of Fadak. Or when Bibi Zainab curses Yazid after he slaughters Imam Hussein alayhi salam, right? That when we see the Ahlul Bayt, they are always living this ethos. They're always living the truth and justice to the best of their ability, because it is what is commanded upon us by God. So this is not just the nature of imamat that allows Imam Ali to do this, but we see this as manifest throughout the Ahlul Bayt, giving us reason to believe that we should be able to do this ourselves. That this is something that we are invited to, and are we doing it? And so I know the letter. I think you took this particular passage, or this particular translation, I should say, from the STEP curriculum. I know it in English through Reza Shah Kazemi's Justice and Remembrance. But for people who are looking for this, obviously the STEP curriculum and Justice and Remembrance are really two great sources to look for this letter and understand, how do we think about extractive capitalism? How do we think about approaching people who are differently abled? How do we think about race and racism? How do we think about gender parity, right? All of this is actually in this letter to Malik al-Ashtar. So while we're searching around and saying, oh, this is all new ideas and this isn't part of our tradition, well, no, here's this letter from Imam Ali that actually talks about a lot of these things already. Not necessarily the manifestations we're seeing now, but ethically, it's all in there. And you don't have to reach. It's very, very explicit.
Right. And that's the beauty of it, right? It being timeless is that we look at it within the current circumstances and we have a new reflection or a new epiphany that comes to us based on that interaction within the current circumstances. Hussein, you've led us to a beautiful narrative which has been very powerful about the role Imam Ali has played in so many different places and circumstances. So certainly it does not look like Imam Ali divides us as Muslims in any way. Would you agree with that?
I yes and no. let me add a little bit of complexity to that, right? Look, imamat is a profound theological concept that absolutely divides Shia communities and non-Shia communities. It is undeniable. It is unquestionable. I'm not looking for a kumbaya, let's all get together moment and erase all these differences. No. This is an important theological concept. I absolutely believe in the notion of imamat. I believe in the idea of a Hazar Imam. This is fundamental to me, to what it means to be Muslim. At the same time, I also have to recognize that Imam Ali is not just Imam for the Shia, right? That Imam Ali is a universal hero for Muslims. He is the universal hero of Islam. When we talk about the Prophet, peace be upon him, is his family, the Quran talks about the Prophet as being an Aswatun Hasana, the beautiful role model, right? Yes, the Prophet is a beautiful role model. And we also have, many of us turn to Imam Ali as a way to understand the totality of ways in which it means to be Muslim when you are not blessed with the guidance of prophethood, right? That the Prophet is this elevated ideal that, of course, we strive for, but Imam Ali, especially if you're not Shia, is a way to think about, well, this is what it looks like in a very practical way that is actually very achievable and very doable. So you can't go, right? You can't go to a proper Qawwali recitation and not hear Man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawlahu, right? You cannot hear he whose Mawla I am, Ali is his Mawla. Right, and these are not Shias. These are, I shouldn't say, they're not always Shia. The majority of them are Sunni, right? Just demographically, numbers-wise, the majority of Sufis are Sunni. Or other singers saying Panchtani hu, right? I'm a follower of the Panchtan of the Ahlul Bayt. Or Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, the Punjabi Sunni Qawwal, who says in Persian, Ali Imam Manasto Manam Ghulam Ali. I am Ali is my Imam, and I am the servant, I'm the slave of Ali. Right. So what does it mean for somebody like that to take this stage with the audience that he does? And to go and do this, right? And we hear this in Bollywood songs, and you find these devotionals to Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima all over the Muslim world, whether they're Shia or not, right? I mean, again, these devotionals exist wherever you go, from the Sitat in Somalia, which are to the Ahlul Bayt, or if you go to the Nawa musicians, the Aswarius orders of Morocco. In Indonesia, you have these strong Alawite tendencies. Turkey, this Ottoman Empire, strong Sunni state. If you go, you see Zulfiqars and Imam Ali's everywhere, right? I mean, this devotion is all over the Muslim world. And I think it's such a mistake. I think it diminishes us when we say Imam Ali is for the Shias, or we only claim Imam Ali as for the Shias. Yes, he has an important role for us, and absolutely we should lean into that, and we should celebrate that, and we should honor that, and we should hold that up. But we should not deny, we should not take away any aspect of who Imam Ali is, because that only diminishes us in any way and capacity. And the Quran here is very, very explicit, right? This is not just me saying it. The Quran is very explicit in chapter 42, verse 23. The Prophet, God tells the Prophet to ask for his reward, only love for his family, right? And this is fascinating, because when you look what the other prophets ask for reward, is that my reward is with my Lord on the day of judgment, with Rabb al-Alameen on the day of judgment. But God says to the Prophet, to Prophet Muhammad says, and ask for love of your family, right? And think about what a shift that is, right? And so any Muslim reading the Quran is going to say, this is serious, right? This is not just our Prophet telling us to love his family, but this is God telling our Prophet to love his family. So this is a direct commandment, and this is something that no prophet has asked for otherwise. So there is something about Prophet Muhammad's family that Muslims recognize as being something very important and something that is part of their lives. And we shouldn't just be taking that away. Imam Ali is that fatah, is that hero, is that knight, is that chivalrous figure, is our role model, right? That we are commanded to love, and whom we love because God loves the Ahlul Bayt, because the Prophet was the Ahlul Bayt and loves the Ahlul Bayt, and it is incumbent upon us to love them as they are and not diminish them in any way, because that only hurts us.
Yeah. Wonderful reflections. And I love the fact that you threw in those beautiful Qawwali devotions. I think we all probably have heard some and relate to so many, even in our own journeys of reflection and remembrance. And in that same light, when we talk about devotion, what does Imam Ali mean for us as we go into our own journeys of Laylatul Qadr in a few days?
Yeah, this is something that I think so much about, Warda, because I think Laylatul Qadr is, well, we were talking about religion and faith before, right? We come together as a community because it's religion. But what happens on Laylatul Qadr is faith, right? This is where our Iman comes in. This is where we are attempting to do what we need to do to bring ourselves, right, to a closer understanding of God, right? It's peace until dawn. This is when the revelation comes. And what do we do with that peace? What do we come when 1,000, if this night is better than 1,000 months, what are we doing in that space? How are we elevating ourselves? What are we praying for, and how are we praying? And I think I always appreciate the articles followed by the tasbihs and the devotion, or connected, or interspersed, where we have these readings and we have the tasbihs and we have our devotional literature all mingled together as part of our ritual practice, because it is religion, it is faith, it is the intellect all coming into space. And I think for me, like all holy days, whether it is Ramadan, obviously that's color falls during Ramadan, or it is Yom Ali, or it is Shab-e Miraj, or it is one of the days in which we honor our Hazrat Imam. It is these holy days for us. We tend to think of them as holidays, but they're not. They're holy days, and these holy days are catalytic moments, right? They're chances for us to recommit to something. And so coming, as I said, we are now coming off the period of commemoration of the martyrdom of Imam Ali and then going into Laylatul Qadr on the 23rd night of Ramadan, that this is, for me, an opportunity to think, okay, we have faith and we have religion and we have intellect. So then what does this mean in terms of action?
Yes.
What does this mean for what happens when morning comes and it is no longer peace? Right? And this is the thing that I always struggle with, because I think prayer should always be a time of peace, a peace for soul, a peace for body. It's a time to heal, right? Whether it is dawn or whether it is the evening or it is the middle of the night, it is that reflective time. But what do you do if you don't have a plan of action after that period of peace is past and you re-enter a world where that peace does not exist? Then what you've done is something only for yourself. And I do not believe that we are called to practice our religion only for the sake of ourselves as individuals. That is giving into our nafs. And so the question is, how do I, when I finish this period of peace, when the dawn breaks on Wednesday morning, when that dawn breaks and that world of not being in peace is there, my commitment from the night before is to think about what are the actions I can take to generate that peaceful world, that I can be in a constant state of prayer, to be in that constant state of zikr, which we are commanded to do. It's not that I can't be in a state of zikr, but can I be in a state of peace and zikr at the same time? And so how do I create that world that allows me to experience that salam as I do my zikr, so that my zikr creates the salam, that creates the space for me able to do my zikr, and it becomes a virtuous cycle rather than a selfish cycle. And that to me is what I'm doing, is I'm thinking about Laylatul Qadr and thinking about Imam Ali, how this was a seamless experience for him. How do I make it a seamless experience for myself, but also create an environment to make it a seamless experience for other people?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for those reflective thoughts, especially this idea of the cyclical nature of our own reflective journeys. I really appreciated how you've highlighted both Imam Ali's role in showing us that the spirituality on the inside is reflected on the outside through our actions, but just in general, how every moment, whether it is Ramadan, Laylatul Qadr, is an opportunity for that progress that we can make, that reflection, that recommitment. So really appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And with everything that we've spoken about, I'm sure there are a lot of questions from the audience. So if it's okay with you, Hussein, we'll move towards that. And we'd love to get your insights upon those questions. So let's start with the first question. One question that's come from the audience is, we have all grown up with the story of Imam Ali being born in the Holy Kaaba. Do you envision a deeper esoteric meaning to this birth?
According to tradition, one of the last utterances of Imam Ali, coming off, as we're talking about his martyrdom, is that his last words were, "By the Lord of the Kaaba, I am victorious." Right? So again, it's this interesting thing that we think about Imam Ali as being born in the Kaaba and then dying. His last words are, "By the Lord of the Kaaba." Right? And to think then, is there an esoteric meaning to the questioner? Is there an esoteric meaning? Yes. Are there esoteric meanings is probably a better way of framing it. And so what I want to give you is a way of reading it. I do not want to presuppose that this is the only way of reading it, because I think it's important that when we start getting into esoteric or Gnostic meanings, to the Batit, and then to the Marifa levels, that what we're really talking about are questions of our own levels of understanding as well. And I think that's very important. So what I perceive and how I understand, both through studying my own experience, may be radically different than how other people do it. So I don't want to preclude that. So I just want to be very clear about that. But for me, I think it is symbolically so very important for Imam Ali to have been born in the Kaaba, not because when there's, again, coming back to Qawwali, right? This is obviously an area of research for me. But there are Qasidas and there are Qawwalis where they talk about where they describe Imam Ali as the Qibla, as the direction in which we pray. And this, of course, causes, people who don't appreciate the poetry. Poetry is a concise language. It's a symbolic language. And they say, oh, Muslims only pray towards the Kaaba. And by saying you're praying towards Imam Ali, this is shirk. This is you're breaking tawheed, you're doing idol worship. And I think it misses the point of what the Qibla is, right? The Qibla is the ways in which we orient ourselves. So for liturgical prayer, if you're talking about namaz, you orient yourselves towards the Kaaba, as that is your Qibla. But I can also orient myself to Imam Ali, right, as an ethical model, right? The Kaaba is Bayt al-Allah, right, is the house of God. And it is historically, theologically, symbolically very important. But it does not offer me an ethical way of thinking unless I start going, how did Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam interact with it? How did Hazrat Ismail alayhi salam interact with it? How did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family interact with it? What is Hazrat Ali's relationship with the Kaaba? And so for me, I think having Imam Ali born in the Kaaba is that he too is a Qibla, not a Qibla that we not that we worship Imam Ali, but is the point through which we understand worship and fulfill our sense of worship and worshipness. In other words, to be Mu'min is to take Imam Ali as Qibla. To be Muslim, you start with being Muslim by taking the Kaaba as the Qibla. To be Mu'min is to take Imam Ali as the Qibla.
Thank you. I think
really delve into your questions of faith and ethics.
No, beautiful. I think that reflects really well on that story and your personal take on it as well. And I think it gives us all a lot to reflect on. Another question that came from the audience is that in Shia Islam, there is a large focus on the role of Imam Ali and the Imams. Prophet Muhammad is understood as the first, most perfect human and mercy upon mankind who brought Islam to the Ummah. So how do we create a greater focus on the Prophet as well? Or do you see a need for that?
For me, absolutely, you cannot understand imamat without understanding Nabuwa and Tawheed. This is a fundamental principle of our religion, of our tariqah. It is in our talim curriculum. It is in our step curriculum, right? It is Tawheed, it is Nabuwa, and it is Imama. You cannot get to Imama without understanding Nabuwa and without understanding Tawheed, right? These things, this cannot exist in a vacuum, right? But I think sometimes what happens is, I'll come back to that hadith where I said, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Ali Babaha. I am the city of knowledge. This is Prophet Muhammad speaking. I am the city of knowledge and Ali is the gate. That people sometimes walk through the door and think they finished the journey, right? So I have walked through the gate of imamat, right? I believe in imamat, and I don't follow into the city. I don't understand, right? You cannot understand the breadth and depth of what a Hazrat Imam is teaching you if you don't understand the imams that came before, and if you don't understand how that's grounded in prophetic teaching, and you don't understand how that's grounded in Quranic teaching, right? These are all guidance and words from Allah. Now, that's not to say everybody has to be a scholar, but I think we have to make sure that we are always open to that learning and that understanding, right? The Imam obviously guides us in the present period, but it is not, we are not so in the present moment that we have no history and we have no theology, right? And it's not just the Prophet Muhammad, although I think the Prophet Muhammad is incredibly important for us as Muslims, but it's also looking at Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, right? Like, these are all prophetic figures mentioned in the Quran that we should be thinking and talking about. So I think that it's incredibly important, and obviously in our formal education it's there, but I think sometimes we tend to forget how to engage and walk all that through. So I really appreciate that question as a way to remind all of us that we need to think about that deeper history that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next question I'm really excited about, and it looks like the audience also enjoyed what I was enjoying during your presentation, which is your stories. And so the question is that your stories about Imam Ali help us to have a better understanding of how he puts spirituality into action, which is the core of today's critical conversation. Do you have more stories that you can share with us about Imam Ali?
This is the thing, when you keep reading on stories of Imam Ali, I have a lot. I just don't know how to call them forward unless I have a prompt. But I do know that we are passing out, or we will be sending out for people who registered, a resource guide that includes an article I wrote on Imam Ali as Islam's first hero, that includes lots of stories. I will share one story that I absolutely love because it involves Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, who I think sometimes we get so caught up in looking for that one person that we forget about the cultures and the systems and the families that also surround that one person. And when we think about the Ahlul Bayt, how obviously Bibi Fatima is there, right? And so there's this story where Bibi Fatima is ill, and she asks of Imam Ali to get her a pomegranate. And it's towards the end of the day, and he goes out and he goes to the markets, and he finds the last pomegranate in the city. And he buys this pomegranate for Bibi Fatima. He gets this pomegranate for Bibi Fatima. As he's going home, he sees a hungry man who says, "Can you please give me food?" And the only food Imam Ali has on him is the pomegranate. And Hazrat Ali gives, Imam Ali gives the man a pomegranate. And he goes home and explains to Bibi Fatima what happened. And Bibi Fatima says, "Yes, this is the right thing. You know, we feed the hungry, right? This is incumbent upon us who have means to give those who do not have the means. So if we have the ability to be fed, then we should be feeding others, right? And particularly relevant as we're in the month of Ramadan." And there comes a knock at the door, and it's the man to whom he had given, Imam Ali had given the pomegranate to, and he has a basket with him. And in the basket, it's full of pomegranates. And the man reveals himself to be the angel Jibreel, right? And it's this beautiful moment where you see that here Imam Ali, in his role as husband, right, in his role as this woman whom he loves so deeply, is sick, and she asks for one thing, and he manages to get this one thing, but there's this higher calling, there's a higher ethical demand that he has, and he gives it away. And he comes back, and she says, "I understand," right? I mean, she's the daughter of the Prophet, and she understands and she accepts this. And it comes back to these Quranic verses where God says, "Those who give, God will reward you manifold with that which what you've given," right? And it feels like this very practical import, right? That yes, we have these commitments to each other, and we should take them very seriously, right? Don't ever neglect your family, but understand that if you have means, to help others without means is very important as well. And that's what we're called to do. And God will reward those who help those who have no other ways, right? Coming back also to that letter of Malik al-Ashtar, to Malik al-Ashtar. So that's just one that continues to sit with me. But there's so many beautiful stories of Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima and Bibi Zainab that exist out there.
No, I love that one. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure whoever asked that question also appreciated it very much. During this conversation, we touched a little bit about intellect and we talked about it. But one of the questions that the audience has brought up is, can you help us understand a little bit more the connection between spirituality and intellect?
I love this question because I think it's so important to the way we live our lives, but I also feel like it's very hard to speak to that in a large audience because I feel this is part of the journey we need to go on, right? But I think I'll try to reiterate the point I wanted to make earlier and see if I can come at it from a different direction. If it helps people understand and open a way for them to go in their own mode, so I think there's at least growing up in the United States, right? I'm born and bred New Yorker, growing up in the United States as a child, I felt like there was always, you could not be religious and be considered intelligent. You could not be considered intellectual and religious. That there's always this dichotomy that if you believed in God, you couldn't be rational. And so to be perfectly rational, you had to give up religion, which is a myth I bought into. It's a child's myth, right? We say, I can only strengthen one, to use a poor gym analogy. It's like, I will only work my arms and never work my legs, right? That's what's happening here. And it's a mistake. It is such a mistake because God has created us, has gifted us with intellect in order to have faith. And how? And I say this as somebody who started life as a geneticist, professional life as a geneticist, right? I think that's the other important thing to remember here, is that I'm not talking about somebody who gave up rationality for religion. I gave up religion for rationality and discovered how empty rationality without religion is, in the same way how facile, how simple religion without rationality is, right? That it's a both and situation. and I'm not unique in this. If you look, one of my so many of my mentors and elders in the field of Islamic studies started life in a hard science or in engineering and moved over to Islamic studies for very similar reasons. And I think that we have to say, how do I understand, how do I inform my intellectual quest in a search that is informed by my commitments to God and God's creation, including other human beings, so I'm not hurtful to other people in my intellectual quest? And how does that help me understand God more deeply, better? And how, through my religion, through my faith, do I use my intellect to look at the world around me and say, I have an obligation here, and to understand that every time a new scientific discovery comes about, that doesn't limit my understanding of God, but it gives me new ways of thinking about God, right? That if we say flowers are beautiful to our eye, but then we say, but those pretty colors have nothing to do with birds who see in a totally different light frequency, or insects who see in totally different light frequencies, that doesn't mean that God hasn't created beauty. It means that God has created beauty that we can't even comprehend, right? And I think that I can believe in evolution from a rationalist perspective and believe that God created Adam from a religious perspective, and it is incumbent then upon me to make a way that works. And it's not just incumbent on me, right? This has been a long-standing thing in the Muslim world, and there are ways, there are sources on this of people who are doing this. But it's not about, oh, Darwin came, I give up God, right? Darwin, the son of a minister, and I gave up God. No, it is, or I gave up, evolutionary theory for religion. It's like, no, these two things are both true. How do I make it work? How do I find the truth out of two things that are true that seem to be opposed? So I don't know if that helps the questioner, but that's sort of what I was thinking when I posited that, and hopefully that opens the door for some people.
Absolutely. And I think even during this conversation earlier, you mentioned this clear role of intellect being to understand the divine and his creations and to serve his creation. So perhaps that's one aspect for us to consider as well. All right, so with that, Hussein, thank you so much for your time. We are concluding here. We really appreciate so much the beautiful narrative that you've laid for us, and I hope that the audience has also found this to be helpful in their journeys of reflection as we approach Laylatul Qadr. And hopefully this is just the start of a critical conversation, and there are many more opportunities to come to reflect further on some of the powerful messages that you have brought up for us today. So thank you everyone for your time. Just a couple of announcements before we conclude. To view past critical conversations and for the recording of this one, you can visit the Facet of Faith page. The website will be provided in the chat box, the.ismaili USA Facets of Faith. There are also a few resources that Hussein has been kind enough to share with us. One being the Sacred Foundations of Justice in Islam, the Teachings of Ali ibn Abi Talib by Reza Shah Kazmi and Leonard Louison. There's also Justice and Remembrance, Introducing the Spirituality of Imam Ali by Reza Shah Kazmi. There are also articles about Imam Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar where you can reflect further on the messages, some of them that were brought up by Dr. Rashid today. And then of course, Dr. Hussein Rashid's own lecture on Imam Ali that will really be a treat for us all to reflect on after this conversation. And the last being SufiComics.com, also being a resource. So please look out for more information on the.ismaili USA webpage and social media pages for further young adult conversations this week and our next critical conversations. And please do take the survey at the end of the session that will pop up on the screen when you leave. So with that, thank you so much, Hussein. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And thank you to the audience for joining. Ya Ali Madad, everyone.